Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to discovering just how powerful those frames that you thought were shitty truly are. Otherwise known as a Warframe guide. Hi there, guys. It's me, your boy, Maid Makari, at your service today. Twitch chat has decided it would be a absolute hoot to punish me by forcing me to record today's guide whilst like this. So, if you have anyone to thank, then blame them, because Twitch chat are the Muppets that did this to me. I mean, unless you're into that kind of stuff, in which case, thank them, I guess. So aside from looking ravishingly good looking in a dress for you today, my aim today is to bring you a type of video that I really love doing, where I take the constructs of Warframes community's mindset and throw it completely on its ass, going, no! Bad. Stop thinking there's a meta. Bad boy. Go to your kennel. I have always said that every frame is powerful and that every frame has a use, as we have to remember that frames are all about the role they fill and utility they bring. And no matter what frame you choose, every frame has something they're good at. For sure, there are some frames which definitely don't bring as much to the table as others, or may have become antiquated over time due to one reason or another, most namely being DE's priority in frames that don't need it, but that's beside the point. Through this video, I want to take an opportunity to introduce you to frames that I believe that are underappreciated, frames that are actually unbelievably fun or unbelievably powerful that just don't seem to get the love and attention they deserve. Keeping in mind, ladies and gents, this, much like an arbitrary, completely useless tier list, is just subjective and an opinionated video that I have made to try and put across that you need to have an understanding that frame choice is down to personal preference. So don't take this seriously. Billy! Billy, I see you over there trying to take this seriously. Come here, you! Now we're going to start this list off with probably one of the most obviously underrated frames in the game, because people don't like to admit this one apparently. Mag! My first frame choice for this list is the illustrious powerhouse that is Mag. And you might be saying, she's not underrated, she's a starter frame. And that is kinda true, yes. But let's face it, out there, out of all the starter frames, she's often the worst pick for a lot of people, or at least the most underutilized pick. Furthermore, if you don't get her as a starter and do eventually build her instead, often is the case that people just build her for the sake of mastery, as they see her array of abilities by themselves and can't quite figure out where her power comes from. And this comes from a couple of different reasons. Whether it be the fact that none of her abilities by themselves are inherently very strong or obviously that strong, or whether it be the fact that she requires a bit of an understanding of modding to actually get the potency out of her. So if you want to make the most out of Mag, you're going to be utilizing weapon synergy along with magnetize. By combining magnetize and plopping it on an enemy, you create a barrier, a field of pulling magnetic force, which draws all enemies to its center. Any projectile object that enters it is then flung around at tremendous force, dealing consistent amounts of damage. And without going into the minutiae of this all I'd recommend is, if you want to know the true power of this, do watch my Mag guide, as it will go into the detail about how this works. The point being is, anything you shoot into this bubble of magnetic energy is then exacerbated in damage. Not only that, this bubble of magnetic energy also creates areas of defensive force, where you're able to ward off enemies, bottleneck areas, and generally create an area of safety. Compounding that even further, Mag does also boast an array of augments that can introduce some team utility, whether that be through stripping armor, pulling in loot, or even disarming vast arrays of enemies. Through this notion, you will find that Mag has a lot more to her than just the base fundamentals of what each individual component is. It's about how these utility and abilities combine together that ends up bringing our powerhouse of a frame to front. The second frame on this list is Garuda. This devious lady of destruction may seem on the surface as a frame that kind of got dropped behind the couch by the general community and forgotten about, especially when it comes to being of anything worth using, but I have to say that Garuda is not only one of my more favorite frames to play, but for general purpose brings a lot to your team as well that may not seem quite apparent from the word go. Now yes, Garuda is by no means going to win any awards for crowd control or damage, but that's not to say she doesn't have potency. Her charged up blast from her blood mirror stacks to insane insane levels, similar to that of a spirit bomb from Dragon Ball Z. Scaling off of damage absorbed and power strength, you can unleash a massive explosion of pent-up sexual frustration on your enemies. To complement that, her playstyle is a fun one. She not only boasts the ability for team support through her blood altar, which generates you and your allies that stand within its vicinity a insanely powerful health regeneration, but she has self-sustain through her energy source by using bloodletting to sacrifice her health to give her energy, which isn't necessarily a problem considering you're probably going to have up your blood altar all the time anyway to regenerate the lost health you generate through getting your energy back. So by combining all of these abilities together, by using your 1 to generate your stacks, using your 2 to generate a blood altar, and then using your 3 to generate energy, you're going to be finding that you're going to be using your abilities all the time. And by combining them together, you're going to have a very powerful onset of abilities. Not to mention, when you do use your 1 on an enemy, if that enemy is below 40% health, they get one shot. So you can selectively target down enemies that are, even in when they are absurdly high level, to just selectively kill them. Just make life easier. Murder them. Absolutely execute them to bits. Nyx. Of course, this list would not be complete without our good old friend Nyx. The frame that no matter how hard DE try, they just can't seem to bring her into relevancy. This is one of those frames that I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail with, as this is just one of those frames that you need to play to get what I'm about to say. Although Nyx may not have the greatest apparent use for team composition and honestly, may even be a bit more of a glass cannon than she was worth being, what she does bring is hardcore lockdown. Unlike what we're dealing with currently in the current climate of our world. Anyway, global crises aside, these abilities will be ranging from mind control that causes enemies to fight amongst each other, which is always a good thing, as when you can get enemies to fight each other, that not only brings the ability to take the fire off your team, but also brings instant scalability because you're getting the enemies to fight each other, and that then bases itself off the level of the enemies rather than what you've modded for. Nyx's biggest reason for being underappreciated as far as I can tell is because none of her abilities are what could be considered a direct output of damage. All of her abilities are inherently designed as either causing other things to do the damage for you or require an insane amount of wind-up to actually get the potency out of. And the abilities that aren't indirectly affecting enemies are then required for you to be sort of sat still. So I'd say that the biggest issue here comes from her tempo. You're going to be focusing on situations where you want to stay in a single area and lock down a location. This kind of thing can be worth using in survival missions, defense missions, mobile defenses. Either way, when you know that you're going to be in a sort of enclosed environment for shorter periods of time, this is when Nyx really comes into her own. And utilizing her augments, each of the abilities these augments are used for can then become infinitely stronger as well. Again, this is something I would suggest experimenting with first before you do anything else. Limbo. I'm not putting him on here just because he wears a top hat. No, sir. I definitely don't have any favoritism here. But in all seriousness, Limbo seems to be the Warframe community's public whipping boy, where people bully him just because they don't understand him. Why does this feel oddly reminiscent of being in college? Limbo may very well be the strongest crowd control frame in all of Warframe. That is, unless you're fighting Corpus and nullifiers decide to come out of nowhere with an RKO and ruin your fun. Now, the reason why I say Limbo might very well be the strongest crowd control in the game is because there aren't many frames in the game that outright remove enemies from the plane of existence. So the way to see Limbo is a little bit of a convoluted one. Limbo exists, and we all exist, in a plane of existence, this plane being reality. Now, when Limbo banishes somebody or puts them into the banished realm, they are now in a second reality. Things in our reality cannot affect things that are banished. Therefore, if there are banished enemies, they are no longer our problem. By utilizing Cataclysm, you can create areas of banished location. If you are inside this banished location, things that are outside this banished location cannot harm you. So you essentially create an area where no enemy can essentially affect you. And even if enemies are within your shadow realm and therefore able to attack you, Limbo has the ability to quite literally become a Time Lord and stop time on them. And to compound that further, if you ever feel like being a defensive god is not your forte, Limbo does have some interesting side builds as well, where you, rather than relying on your range and duration to ward off locations, you can build power strength and make a Rift Torrent build, wherein any enemy affected by your Rift Surge gives you bonus damage, therefore giving you even more playstyles to fundamentally go with. Zephyr! That's right, Zephyr is underappreciated as a shock that came to nobody. Don't pretend you didn't pass your nose up at her when you saw her in your clan dojo. But that's fine. I forgive you. This time. Zephyr has ungodly survivability from her turbulence, as when you build for above 130 range, your wind shield that you generate strays from your body far enough to prevent all forms of damage that aren't melee damage or explosions, as your turbulence redirects all forms of bullets, projectiles, and stuff towards the outward areas. So in essence, if you have your turbulence active, at no point are you really going to die, especially with the right build. And with her recent tweaks that came from the Deimos Arcana update, she's become a lot stronger just in the sheer raw number of things, where a lot of her abilities have been improved and buffed quite tremendously by at least 40% on each of them. Everything she does isn't necessarily that effective systemically, but she does do a little bit of everything. Now, this doesn't necessarily affect her in terms of being a useful frame, but instead Zephyr becomes a tanky frame with a rather dynamic and fluidic playstyle. A frame that you're going to enjoy using for the sheer novelty of being able to dash around all over the place and control the power of wind. And when you do use the abilities that may not be effective by themselves, by combining them together, you can get not only tornadoes of crowd control, but tornadoes that can generate really nice status procs across large areas. And although I will never say that Zephyr will ever win any awards for being able to deal the damage, having a frame such as Zephyr for solo play can often be something that's quite understated. But much like Vegemite, it's kind of a love it or hate it thing. You're either going to love her or you're going to hate her. I'd say give her a try though, see what she's like. Equinox is the next frame on our list here, so this might seem like a bit of a weird choice for this list, but I can actually assure you Equinox doesn't get the love she deserves, mostly down to how people only ever seem to use her for her maim. But what if I were to tell you that there was more to this frame than just infinitely scaling damage? By using her augments as well as also jumping between her different modes, not only do you have an array of abilities that can debuff your enemies, buff your allies, and also heal, there's never really a situation where Equinox is bad. So whether you're the kind of person who's completely ignored Equinox because you don't quite understand how her stacks build, or whether you just haven't played her at all because she doesn't seem like the kind of frame you'd want to, Equinox has a lot more to her. Try her out for the supportive role. Try her out for the insane AoE damage she brings. All that needs to be said to understand her fully is that when you have your 4 active and channeling, basically anything that goes on around you, whether it's dealing damage or taking damage, generates your stacks of mend or maim. When you then release your 4, it's then generated out into the enemy or your allies depending on the state you're in. You then just complement that based on the other abilities you have at the time. You'll use your 1 to swap between your modes, and then your 2 and your 3 to debuff enemies or buff your allies. If you're in your night mode, you're going to focus on supporting your team, making enemies weaker, and buffing your allies. If you're in your day mode, then it's going to focus on buffing allies and then dealing damage. And to round out the video, we have 2 more frames. I'm going to incorporate both of these into the same notion here, specifically because they're both kind of underappreciated for the same reason. Vorban and Baruch. Now, Vorban and Baruch have generally been underappreciated because people don't quite seem to realize that there is innate power behind not only their abilities, but the fact that they just generally don't seem to get the love they deserve. Vorban is a master of crowd control. Baruch can innately put out crowd control whilst also dealing huge amounts of damage. If you've ever wanted a Vorban that is powerful, it is so simple to build for. You build for pure range with a bit of duration and efficiency, and not only do you have vortexes, which can do the big suckening, but you also have his Bastille, which can hold enemies up and keep them in a range if need be. Either way, anything caught in Vorban's Bastille or Vortex are basically removed from the game, similar to that of Limbo's. This then allows you to set up for great combo wombos where you can utilize your orbital bombardment, which although it isn't necessarily that huge in damage, it does scale decently enough to the point where it will kill most level 60 enemies without too much of an issue. You then have utility in the form of being able to buff your allies with one of your balls you generate from your your two, and on top of that, with the other abilities you have amidst your two, you can throw out shrapnel mines, you can throw out buffing mines, you can put out movement improving abilities. There's just a lot that goes into Vorban that not only makes him very fluid to play, but very fun to play as well. So although you may not get a lot of damage out of him, he is an amazingly powerful frame to use, especially in open world content. And similar to that mindset with Baruch. Baruch may seem a little bit lethargic at a glance, in the sense that you have to build up his restraint or reduce his restraint. But when you get into the flow with Baruch, and when you have an understanding of how damage is generated with Baruch, all of a sudden you start dealing insane red crits and everything seems to melt around you. And even if you don't use Baruch for his insane damage output, he is great for just general survivability and crowd control. Using Lull and Desolate Hands will not only keep you alive and disarm enemies, but you can then utilize a decent range build with Lull to put a huge array of enemies to sleep on a dime. So these two frames, although they are played differently, have the similar mindset of try it before you condemn them to death, so to say. And those, in my eyes, are some of the more underappreciated frames in Warframe. Now, technically, there are going to be some more out there, and I'm sure you all have frames that you think are underappreciated, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the joy of having an opinion. No matter what I think, you are going to think something different. And this is why I want you, yes, you, no, not you, Billy, fuck off, Billy, go away, get the fuck out of the video. But everyone else that isn't Billy, I want you to leave a comment down below. Which frames do you think are personally the most underappreciated or underutilized? There's different reasoning behind what can be underutilized or underplayed, ranging from whether it's just not played that much, whether it's not that useful, or whether you just don't know what it does. So I would love to get a conversation going so we can try and help bring awareness to frames that we might want to try out more to have more of a playstyle to go for. Because the more frames you have access to, the more frames you're open to playing, the more fun you're going to have with the game. And I think it's about getting past that mindset that just because something isn't insanely powerful right off the bat doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that maybe you need to take a different approach to how to play it. So as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to come and join us in recording these videos, you can come by our Twitch. We usually record them on stream. Check out my Twitter for daily updates and stupid memes and art that I draw that is totally not publicly acceptable in any way, shape, or form. And thank you again for watching this video. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, do all that kind of good stuff that YouTube arbitrarily forces you to do to make sure I have relevancy. And I will see all of you in the next video. Ta-ra!